Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be checking out the HDMI capabilities of the Topsky F7X V2 FPV goggles. So I thought I'd do a separate video on the HD side of things because I think it's a slightly different demographic compared to the Analogue FPV racer side of things, and it's probably a smaller demographic for now, at least anyways, because there's a limited number of products that you can use it with. For example, the Connex Pro Sight or the FPV Blue system, which is kind of in the racer class, but it's seen as a system that's not quite there yet compared to analog and latency and things like that. And then there's going to be what I'm going to be testing it with, and that is my Phantom. So I've got a Phantom 4 Pro, and it has got a HDMI module here. So I'm going to be able to view, hopefully, my video feed directly from here into the goggles, but there are a couple of things that you need to know about. So I kind of touched on the subject when I received the original V1s of these, but those goggles had so many issues that I sort of didn't really investigate it further. But now these goggles are usable, I think it's fair to test that out. So one thing that these goggles said that they would do is support a 1080p input. So they are a 1280 by 720p display. So if you are inputting 1080p, then it's going to downscale it. So I've done some investigation on that, because with the V1s I took a 1080p 60Hz signal and I plugged it into the HDMI slot here, so it's like a micro HDMI, and you're given a lead, which is nice. So yeah, I can't remember the exact names of these, but this isn't a full-size HDMI, it's like the one down, is it called the mini and the micro? Not sure. Anyways, you're given one of those cables and it's the micro side that fits into there. So yes, with the V1s I plugged a 1080p 60Hz source in and I got a scrambled image, and then I changed the source to a 720p by 1280 and it comes up on the computer. So this is all plugged into a computer. It came up and it said native, so it recognized the goggles as being a 720p native device, which is always good news. It means that they haven't cheated or anything like that. And when I chose the 720p setting on the computer, then I got a picture through here. So I assumed that 1080p doesn't work, and it kind of doesn't, so I've played around with it. And there's a setting in Windows, so this is all plugging into the HDMI on a computer and in Windows. There's a setting that's 1080i, and I think that's a 1080p input, but with a 30Hz output. So when I connected 1080i in there, it worked fine. So I guess you could say technically a 1080p input does work, but you have to be very specific on the inputs. For example, with the V1s, I plugged my Phantom into these, same as I'm going to do today, and I got a scrambled picture again. But I've managed to play around with the settings, and that is because it will only accept a 720p input at 60Hz, and my Phantom's HDMI output was set to PAL, which is 50Hz. So I went into the settings on here and I changed it around to 60Hz, and perfect. The picture came through and I can now fly with my Phantom. So that's absolutely fantastic. So if you are interested in these goggles, because I know there's quite a few people out there that are just buying these goggles for the HD side of things. In fact, you could say that the color scheme matches the Pro Sight, doesn't it, with the black and the red. Then I would say make sure that your system can do it. I think the Pro Sight does do 720p at 60 Hz, but if you try and do 50 or 30 at that, you'll get a scrambled image. So the only two that I've managed to get work is 1280 by 720p at 60 Hz and 1080p at 30 Hz. And then everything else, it kind of upsets it. So yeah, if you are looking at these for HD, then it is only really accepting those inputs. Actually, it accepted any variation of 1080p with the 30 Hertz. So yeah, there's probably some more formats out there that it supports, but if you're going to put a 1080 60 Hertz through this, it's going to scramble the image, and if you're going to put, say, a 720p 50 Hertz through this, it's also not going to accept it as well. Whereas, dare I say it, the Fat Sharks, it seems to accept anything, but the Fat Sharks are more expensive, and technically they don't have a HD display. So the big question is, are the screens better than the Fat Sharks? Are they sharper when you plug it into HDMI? Because it should be, because they're 720p. And guess what? The answer is yes, kind of, actually. When I compare my Fat Sharks plugged into the HDMI into here against here, I can see pixels. Whereas if I plug these in, I can't see pixels. But there are some things to consider. Just because this is a higher resolution screen doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better quality. For example, I think the Fat Shark screens deal with contrast much better. So the blacks are darker, and just there's better contrast between the pictures, where I find this one a little bit more washed out, but there's no pixels on here and it's definitely sharper overall. Another thing that you want to watch out for with these goggles is the white balance. So it's pretty hard for me to show on a video like this, but the white balance on here is very cool. So I don't mean cool as in good, I mean cool as in there's a slightly blue tint to the picture. And you might be thinking, well, there's a color setting in there, you can change the color. You can't. Doesn't seem to work on the HDMI setting. That only seems to work on the analog receiver. So you are stuck with a slightly bluey tint to the picture. And that is the same if you plug it into the computer. And you might be thinking, well, can you change the white balance on the Phantom? Yes, you can, but that will just make it look good through the goggles. And when it comes to what the Phantom records, it's going to be, well, the colour's not going to match. So I would say just leave the colour alone there. Another thing that might annoy you about this goggle is that if you are investing in it just for the HD, so you know, you could ignore the modules or anything like that, it boots up every single time in analog mode, so it doesn't save when it's in the HDMI mode. So it's just this button here, by the way, just a couple of presses. You can do 2D and 3D, which is quite nice. Now, one thing that I do like about the HDMI on this is that the screen is 16:9 anyways, whereas the Fat Shark's 4:3. So these are the HD3s, and when you plug the HD3s into a Phantom, it does crop the top off. It does switch to 16:9, but that's something that I've always complained about Fat Sharks, and this is something Fat Shark need to do on their next goggles, is make it so we can switch between 4:3 and 16:9 in analog mode, because it does it for HDMI, but we have 16:9 CMOS cameras now that we're using, so they need to update that. So yeah, it crops the top of the screen off with the Fat Sharks, whereas this, it fills the screen. However, the field of view is very similar, because when the top and bottom is cropped off, it's still a 42-degree field of view, or about that 40 degree, so you still get about the same picture size through the Fat Sharks in 16:9 as you do in 16:9 with these, but it fills the screen better. So I was a little bit concerned about the ghosting in HD, and you still can see the ghosting just as you can in analog, but it's nowhere near as bad as the V1s, and it's acceptable. I do find that if you've got an on-screen display, so you know, like white text, it's smudged a lot more on these than it is on the Fat Sharks. And like I was saying, the image is sharper on here, but because the displays of the Fat Shark are a better quality, I would say. The colours are better, the contrast's better, but again, they're a more expensive goggle, and you're going to get some good use out of these, I think, in HD. As I mentioned, you can also plug them into the computer and watch movies through them, which is what this technology was originally designed for. From Topsky, I think they were originally a cinema goggle company that have delved into FPV. And yep, you can plug it into the computer and you can run your simulator, so like liftoff or anything like that, and you can practice your FPV through them as well. It's pretty nice. So there you go, that is my overview of the HDMI capabilities of the Topsky F7X. My conclusion is they are very usable and they are HD and they are sharper than the Fat Sharks. But when I compare the two images together, the screens are better on the Fat Sharks when it comes to the brightness and contrast, the colours, and also the clarity of things on the on-screen display as well. So there's no sort of smudging of text, whereas on these there is. I guess that is just a limitation of the technology. But there you go, I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get some, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.